as soon as the flowers start blooming, the students start graduating, then all of a sudden we have a panel, right, with folks who hire archaeologists. And we alternate every other year between folks who work for government agencies and folks who work for private companies. And so this year we have esteemed colleagues from agencies. So I'm gonna introduce you folks, but I would like, you know, to start it off with maybe description about your pathway, your career, you know, how you come to have these jobs and, you know, some of the things that helped you along the way. We've got Linn Gassaway from Lassen National Park. I saw a great talk about fire archaeology. Thanks for coming today. Linn Price from California Transportation Department. Starla Lane. All right, so I just leave it up to you. Please let me know, you know, how'd you get started? What helped you as a student transition into your career? Of course, you could fill the whole hour, right? But yeah, there you go.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, as you said, I'm Linn Gassaway. I actually graduated from Cal in 1991, so my bachelor's is from here. Go Bears.
Right.
Definitely a great place to start. From there, I did a little bit of what we call CRM, Cultural Resource Management, but for contracting, a contract company. Here's the irony of archaeology in the real world is that the landowners who actually manage this archaeological sites for the long term are just called archaeologists. And the companies that come in and then leave are called CRM, Cultural Resource Managers. So good irony there. But from there, doing some CRM, contracting, I just applied for a job one day and ended up in Pennsylvania working for the US Forest Service. Did spend a couple of years there and then jumped to Texas, working for the Texas National Guard. Then I really started, I would say, started my career. Another luck, I put an application in. I got hired at Yosemite National Park. I spent the next 4 years working there. When somebody just walked up to me and said, would you be interested in doing some doing archaeology for the fire program? I was like, I don't know what that means, but sure, if it means I have a job. And they said, yeah, you'll have a job for the next 4 years if you do well. That turned into a career because the next job after that was a permanent job with the Park Service. And then I jumped to the Forest Service. So I spent 18 years with the US Forest Service, working my way up from seasonal to what we call a district archaeologist to a forest archaeologist. And then just recently, about a year ago, I jumped back to the Park Service, National Park Service, and I work at Sequoia Kings Canyon National Parks. It's 2 parks, 1 management, as their, we call it Section 106 coordinator or their Cultural Resource Compliance coordinator. So everybody know what Section 106 is?
Nobody
There's
knows.
a few, but so Section 106, the National Historic Preservation Act, is actually what 90% of archaeologists who don't, all the non-academic ones, probably why we have jobs. And so I make sure that we're protecting the cultural resources and following the law of protection whenever the park wants to do any kind of project, from putting it into a campground to cutting down a tree to fixing a road that was damaged in the storm. And that's where I am today. So that's my introduction.
So I'm David Price. I'm the acting office chief of the Cultural Studies Office in the Caltrans Division of Environmental Analysis. That's at headquarters. My office oversees statewide policies and best practices for all cultural resource concerns that have to do with project delivery in Caltrans. Caltrans has a lot of things. Project delivery is one of the main ones, and compliance with a slew of cultural resource laws is necessary to get projects built and to plan projects. As she was saying, Section 106 is one of those. I got started in the early 2000s on the private side as a field tech Pretty much they just needed an 18-year-old who could use a breaker bar to bash through a bunch of layers of asphalt in downtown Nipomo. From there, I kind of got in doing lab work at the same company. Spent several years there until I went into my bachelor's program at Fresno State, which had a good bachelor's of archaeology. I got that in 2007. Spent a couple of years palling around doing field tech work, kind of working my way up through the company until I hit the ceiling that folks tend to hit with not having their master's degrees in our field. So I went off to Sonoma State. Sonoma State is a primarily historic focused school that focuses on cultural resource management. So there's a heavy regulatory aspect to that program. And I got my master's there, of course, in prehistoric archaeology instead of the strength of the school, but I was very interested in bedrock mortars and the kind of landscape, some of the landscape aspects of that. So I got my master's from there and promptly jumped, instead of going back to the private side, to Caltrans. I got hired in Caltrans in 2015 in a contentious capacity increasing project up in Northern California called the Willits Bypass. It's fully built now. You may have heard about it. It was not the most loved project at the time. And so I jumped into Caltrans in the middle of the project. It was active. We had about half a dozen archaeological investigations going on, and there were 3 tribes who were nowhere near happy with Caltrans. And so my job was largely to try to work through issues with our compliance on the technical side, as well as our consultation requirements under 106 and under a programmatic agreement we were trying to finish for that project. That was in District 3. The entire North region is kind of regionalized. I worked my way there for a while when I took a promotion to headquarters as a Section 106 reviewer. So that is someone who was responsible for oversight of the technical reports completed under Section 106 at Caltrans. A lot of what you do if you go into the agency side will be overseeing the development of those reports. We have a special role at headquarters in overseeing those before they're submitted to our regulatory agency, the Office of Historic Preservation. I promoted from the reviewer position to the Section 106 coordinator, who oversaw statewide compliance with Section 106. Spent a couple of years there until my boss decided to move to the Office of Historic Preservation, where I moved up to the office chief position, where instead of just focusing on Section 106, I focused on statewide compliance for the entire cultural regime, which includes a lot of things: CalNAGPRA, NAGPRA compliance, Section 106, PRC 5024, and Section 4F, which are probably specific to our agency. Well, I know 4F, it's a Transportation Act law. 5024 is for any California agency that owns land. And then we have a couple of other ones as well. We have a significant bridge program, or Caltrans, and a couple of other things. So I oversee the broader compliance aspects and statewide policy for our agency. And that's what I'm at now.
My name is Starla Linn, and I am actually kind of the odd one out because I do not technically work for an agency. I work for PG&E, which is a private investor-owned utility. However, we're highly regulated through the California Public Utility Commission. So our job is to keep the company in compliance with both federal and state cultural resource laws. So we have a very large territory. PG&E serves about 60 million people. Our service territory is about 700,000 square miles. And we've got, on top of that, 16 hydroelectric river basins stretching 500 miles. So we have federal permitting, we have state permitting, we have assets extending onto tribal and sovereign land. So there's a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of resource concerns. And so what our job is that we make sure that the cultural resource specialist at PG&E, there's actually 14 archaeologists and 1 architectural historian. What we're charged with is making sure that we are preparing the proper deliverables to coordinate with our agency partners, so that when PG&E needs to go in, and whether it's replacing a pole or building a brand new transmission line, we're keeping the company in compliance with any of the applicable regulations. So we kind of have to know state, federal, and private land too, you know, what's expected, and what does good stewardship look like on private land. Okay, because there's not necessarily the section 106 or the Sequoia regulations or Public Resource Code 5024 saying thou shalt do this. So what's the appropriate action and the ethical actions to take when we are encountering cultural resources that are on private land, in general, what we call franchise, which is kind of county public right of ways, and there's not necessarily an agency involved. So the way that I got to PG&E is I did my undergrad at California State University, Chico. And I was very fortunate that when I was 19, I got a work study in the lab. And at the time, they had a pretty robust research program where they were going out and basically doing CRM through the university. So I went out with other more senior archaeologists. I was doing timber harvest plans, so surveys, site records. There's actually, you may have heard of this project called the Sites Reservoir that they're doing up north. It's an off-water reservoir. In the like 2001, I was working on the surveys and the original site records for that. So I actually got a really great experience on what good looks like in terms of documentation, methodologies, different approaches. From there, I went to grad school at UMass Boston, and I went out there to work with a gentleman named Steve Silliman because of the focus on working with descendant communities. My thesis is on the second oldest reservation in the United States with the Eastern Peacock community. The reservation was established by the Connecticut colony, so getting the opportunity to work with that descendant community was really very key for shaping me and my approach in archaeology and the way that I work at PG&E and engage with stakeholders. You really learn the value of listening to these communities, of having critical conversations, which sometimes can be tough, but also very rewarding. So, and in the engagement, regardless of whether it's a Native American community or some other descendant community, like the power of having engagement with and connecting the cultural resources to those descendant communities and providing education to the broader community. So after UMass, I came back. Excuse me. I was a staff archaeologist for a year at Chico State. And then I moved down here to the Bay Area because my husband is a chef and there's better chef opportunities here than in Chico. I worked for 8 years at a place in Berkeley called Pacific Legacy, which is a cultural resource firm. And then I got hired in 2015 for PG&E. And so I've been at PG&E for 8 going on to 9 years. Currently at PG&E, my title is Senior Consulting Scientist. And so specifically what I do is I'm actually one of the leaders on the team that kind of helps provide direction, calibration on our team. I am the programmatic lead for the 10,000 miles of undergrounding that PG&E is doing. So I'm helping to establish what our process is going to be working with agencies, how we're going to approach it and things like that.
Great, great. We have a couple questions, but I know that folks in the audience have all the questions. My first question, so I don't know, how many folks know that in 2023, they passed this massive infrastructure act, Build Better Back, right? It's supposed to be quadrillions of dollars, right? That's gonna go into our infrastructure. And so there's been some archaeologists who have mentioned that this is gonna result in tons of extra jobs. So maybe I'll ask them, I mean, these are the folks who might benefit from Build Better Back, like, I guess maybe tell us, do you think this is gonna affect your job? And if so, you know, do you think that's gonna end up with more jobs for archaeologists, fewer, or just the same as it has been?
It has already six-tupled the number of archaeologists that the Forest Service has in California. Every forest has hired at least 5 archaeologists permanently. In the Park Service, less numbers, but still an increased hiring, an increased amount of contracting. I currently, based on the infrastructure bills, have $500 million worth of infrastructure work happening in my parks. Redoing campgrounds, new housing for employees, new infrastructure, new upgrades to roads. We can't hire enough people as quickly as the jobs are happening. In my lifetime, there's never been an easier, and time to get into the federal archaeology. While they hired, 5 and 6 new people on forest, people were moving to new jobs just as quickly. So right before I came to the Park Service, I moved to a new forest. Right as I started, we had 5 new people start at the same time. I just talked to somebody back there. I left because I got a better offer. All 5 of them left because they got better offers. And so now they're trying to backfill that. And so it's just, you get a job, people move up, get a job. And so it's sort of a sucking sound. There's not enough archaeologists. If you apply for a seasonal job, I bet you get 10 offers. Because you just can't fill the number of field archaeologists that are needed to get all the surveys done. And then as people move up and are doing the paperwork and the reports and the legal compliance, there's not enough archaeologists for the number of jobs and the need that's out there right now.
I think you're gonna hear a consistent theme across the board here, a couple of them probably, and one of those is that. It's put literal billions of dollars into the budget. So Caltrans is we administer for California, the federal aid highway program. So we have assignment under NEPA and Sequoia, or well, under NEPA at least, as a federal agency for the purposes of the federal aid highway program. So we get a lot of that money administered through the federal aid highway program. It's put billions of dollars into our budget. That federal money can be applied to almost any kind of project Caltrans does from the capital side, from the project delivery side essentially, and it has resulted in a lot of activity from repair to new projects altogether. We're administering a lot of active transportation projects and multimodal types of transportation. We have our own freight and mobility sections. So it's not just adding roads, because I think a lot of us are trying to change that in Caltrans and out, but we're still building a lot of projects and maintaining and repairing a lot of projects. And we administer all that money and we cannot keep people employed fast enough. But I'm the acting office chief right now because of a similar set of movement that occurred within Caltrans on top of retirements that are already kind of naturally happening in our field right now. A lot of the old guard are retiring right now. And moving, leaving vacancies that the kind of next generations are moving up into fill and creating vacancies for all of you right now. I will agree. It is probably the easiest time it's ever been to get a job at Caltrans as well as an archaeologist. And we need folks badly. So yes, there's a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of time constraints put on with the Infrastructure and Job Act, ARPA funds, and some of the other federal stimulus projects that are stimulus funds that are coming out, so we have to use them fast, but they have knock-on effects that last for a long time. So yes, it's having a lot of impact and it's a good time to be heading into the field right now, I'll tell you that.
Well, so since we're a private agency, we don't get the funds, but what I will say is that we have armies of contractors, like to get the work done that we need to. We have just hundreds of contractors. But the way that is impacting us is that, so as say Caltrans is building new roads, they're expanding roads, we have to move existing infrastructure. We have to move our pipelines out from underneath. We have to move the electrical lines over. And so sometimes the agencies will do the studies and then sometimes we'll do the studies. And this part goes back to that partnership of, so there's plenty of work associated with the infrastructure, the money that's being pumped into the infrastructure.
Sometimes we call them and ask them to move them back to the same side of the road they were just on.
No, that's right. Yeah, you put it over there and then put it back here.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. That was actually set up because I already knew with it. But I wanted to hear from you all. I wanted you, it's not just me making it all up, right? So, you know, my next question, I have just one more and then I'll open it up to folks in the audience. My next question is someone who is here at the university trying to prepare folks to go into schools or to go into careers. What do you think some of us here at the university can do to better prepare students to be able to apply, to know what they're doing, to come in and hit the ground running? What can we do?
Switch directions.
Nah, okay. So I think, for what I'm seeing, both when we look to hire internally and, with, our contractors is, in addition to having solid build skills, like having a solid foundation in archaeology, having kind of some of the soft skills I've already talked about in terms of organization, communication. Let's see, I had a couple things actually. Yes, let's see, you guys help me out. Those are like some of the big
In
ones.
terms of
Oh, and regulation too, like going back to, that's what, sorry, the main thing I say is that everything we do, the means to the end is compliance, right? We have jobs because of a regulatory context. There's the state and federal laws. So having at least that base understanding of, I'm not just going out to do archaeology for the sake of archaeology, but everything I do is actually within this regulatory context, and I'm trying to reach this end. And not everybody kind of comes out of school understanding what that means is.
Yeah, there's 1,000 themes that kind of intersect with that, really. Having exposure to the expectations of the regulatory side of things is going to be very important. It's really, it's really helpful when you folks have that as you're coming in. As you come in at the, earlier stages, we're kind of looking for your ability to oversee, studies. I know there's the kind of perception of the academic side versus the regulatory side. I don't really like that because essentially the regulatory side is based upon the academic side, right? When the regulatory side is looking for the importance of cultural resources to people, and then why it's important, and then how our projects are affecting the significance, the importance of those sites or resources to the people that find them important. So that could be the archaeological community. More and more, the second thing that I was going to say is it's their importance to descendant communities, especially Native American tribes. If you are coming in to a federal context, and not even just federal, but state, but especially in the Section 106 context, tribes and federally recognized tribes have special status. And so your ability to translate and to understand, one, that a large part of what we'll be working with is descendant communities and their understanding of how we're intersecting with their important resources, what they are, why they are important to them, how our projects are affecting resources in their eyes, and being able to translate that to regulatory language is very important, and you can get it early, the earlier the better, but coming in at least with the understanding that that will be a part of it, and it will not just be writing research designs and then following your own kind of pursuits, but really more trying to look at it from the public side, from the public benefit of what we're doing and why we're spending this money. It's really good to know. I'll add another one. You can all teach technical writing, which I'm sure this is a repeating concept, but when you're writing your research design or something for more public consumption, you want to use language you want to use literary language that's interesting and intelligent. When you're writing to a regulatory agency, you don't. You want to clearly and concisely and quickly say what you're trying to say. You do not need to say the site is situated upon a gentle 12-degree slope on the apex of an undulation. The site is on a hill. Just say the site's on a hill, please. And kind of think about it that way. And you'll save a lot of your own time writing these kinds of reports and then translating it over to the regulatory side.
How many people are undergraduates? Almost everybody. How many are graduate students? Right in the back. Alright. For undergraduate, field school,
Yeah.
field work, that's your entry in, right? So knowing what an artifact is, knowing how to describe that artifact and knowing what makes up a site. And knowing to ask those questions when you're starting on a project, because the reality is everybody classifies them differently. Like some places say 5 artifacts are a site and some places say 20 artifacts are a site. But being able to understand what that actually means, and then knowing what that field work is and knowing how to walk a transect, how to walk a straight line in the middle of a forest where there's nothing else. I'll say at this point, if you want a federal job, be able to live outside a city in a small town where you might have to drive an hour to go to a big city. Be willing to be out in the field, know how to camp, know how to be dirty. Archaeology is a dirty job. Unless you're in the lab and then you get dirty and then you can clean up, but it's not, when you're first starting out in the field, it's hot, it's dirty, it's sweaty, it's exhausting. And when you first start, good impression is be in shape. At least be able to hike 5 miles. You know, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in a straight line, maybe digging holes too, putting in shovel tests. You're probably not gonna do a lot of excavation when you first start, I mean, maybe. But I haven't done an excavation unit in a decade. A lot of it in California is just walking the ground back and forth and then seeing an artifact and recording it and putting it on the site record. So knowing how to fill out a site record, what goes in it, what doesn't, how to accurately describe it so that the next person in a decade can read it and go, yep, I'm at the right place. Knowing how to take pictures that aren't selfies, but show the site and show the artifacts. For grad students, if you haven't done that, then you need that too. But then writing, because if you've got a master's, they're gonna expect that you can write a report, you can take all that information that somebody else did in the field and translate it into a report of findings. And then also, is it important? So is that site important? And that's based on the National Register of Historic Places and the criteria for the National Register of Historic Places and the integrity of the site and how it fits into the history of the area and the background. And then those research designs and your survey or your testing, how you're gonna do that on a site. And that, coming through that, as you move through understanding how 5 obsidian flakes are interpreted to what somebody did there in the past and what tribe may have been associated with it. And is that important or not? Is it important just on its own, or is it important based on everything around it? And all the stories that those tribes have about that area. And that interpretation of what we do, you know, what we do as archaeologists, how we interpret that site, it's how people lived in the past. And whether that's repetitive information or a new and unique information about a time period or the use of that location. And right now, the 2 hot topics are cultural landscapes. So how things interact with each other. You're gonna hear that from the tribes a lot. How you can see from one site to another site and how they might interact. And in some places in the Southwest, you might have like where they actually signaled each other. Signal smokes and everything else, or just other things. And then emergencies. How many people have been affected by a wildfire in the last 5 years? Yeah, so whether you're dealing with all that infrastructure money that's going into fuels work to reduce fuels around infrastructure so that it doesn't burn. or reducing it across the landscape on our big land management agencies, doing surveys before people reduce that fuels. Or you're coming in after the fire and dealing with post-fire damaged infrastructure. So PG&E, all the lines that burned up have to be put back in place. You need to do an arc survey before you put those poles back in. Roads get damaged during emergencies. New people rebuild their houses. All those trigger archaeology and compliance to the state and federal laws. I think that covers that.
I think that's great, yeah, as you can tell, there's a lot. Cut out for us. All right, so we have plenty of time. I wanna open it up to the audience. Do folks have any questions here? Yes, please.
So my question would be, like, what is the application process and how long it takes for each of, these jobs? Cause I know the federal jobs will be different from like the private company.
Yeah, so they do have some special processes, but I would say that one theme that I will point out probably across all of us is that, when you apply for a job, it does not come to me. It doesn't go to them. It goes to, I'll call it HR, right? And so what HR is going to do is they're going to look at, the job posting, and they're gonna look at your application. They're gonna look for keywords. So what you need to make sure you do is make sure that in your guys' application, it's organized, the minimum requirements for that job are clearly laid out and able to find, because then HR is gonna take those and then they forward them to me or these guys, right? And then we look at them, and then that's when I'm gonna look at your resume, which is hopefully organized and doesn't look like you're yelling at me. You know, because that's what, going back to, like, I'm looking for someone who's got organized, right? And can do project management. If your resume is not organized, doesn't give me a lot of faith. But the first thing you need to do, and I think a lot of people don't realize, is that, and this is kind of the struggle too, when we talk about wanting to make the field more diverse. How do we get people more diversity into the field, right? And get you guys into these jobs? You have to get past that first hurdle, which is getting your resume to me so that I can have a face-to-face interview with you.
All good points. For Caltrans, you're gonna get onto the Cal Careers website. You're going to take an exam that's specific to the classification that you are hiring for. And then you will fill out an application, which is all part of this program. Like she said, completeness. So we have rubrics when they finally make it to us. First, our HR folks. Can't move on things. Our HR folks are going to make sure you qualify, you meet the minimum quals for that job. And then they're not gonna tell us whether you do, and they're gonna send it to us to do a bunch of work, and then we're gonna do a bunch of work, and then they're gonna tell us, sorry, you wasted your time. But most of you will meet those minimum quals. So when you're filling out that application, make sure you're filling out all the fields. Like, I can't, you know, it has to be said, make sure you fill out all the fields. Give your full job history and tell the relevant stuff in that job description. You'll be looking, we have duty statements. Look at the duty statement, look at the core competencies, and look at the actual duties that are included on that duty statement. And use that in your application in the job description area, because then we'll get it. We will we will basically screen you for an interview based on a rubric that has a lot of that information that we're looking for in that job description. At which point we will then say, yes, we want to interview you. We'll send it back to HR. They'll say yes or no, you can interview this person, and then it'll come to us. Once we interview you, we're gonna have different questions, and we'll be looking for other things. And we'll be grading you finally for hire on basically a combination of all of it. And so, you know, it'll do good to practice those interviews. If you are nervous, we understand, but also if you're nervous and you can't actually get information out that we're looking for, we can't use that, right? So we understand, but nonetheless, you still need to be able to communicate. We'll let you see the questions as we're interviewing you. So pay attention to those questions as you're getting interviewed, right? Answer those questions. We give you a certain amount of time. You don't have to answer them right away. You can look at them. You can come back if you have time at the end, and you can add to it. So pay attention to the very questions we're asking you and answer those questions, as opposed to, you know, kind of going off on tangents. That was real specific.
USA Jobs, yeah. Is it .gov?
I think it is, yes.
Just Google USA Jobs. That's where like every federal agency puts their jobs up. And then you can search archaeology, but I would say don't search it with the second A. Search it with the American way of spelling archaeology, so Archeology. And that across the United States, including our territories, Puerto Rico, Guam, all of that, in all the different agencies, any federal agency will have jobs on there. And you can set up searches, so you get emails. You probably have to re-up those emails every 6 months. Right now, jobs are going up all the time. Really read it. And also announcements, maybe for like 300 different locations across the United States, and you have to pick like 5. And they don't really let you go back and pick more, except for like if you're completely changing where you want to go. Read what the job description is, and I'll just say steal those words and put them in your resume and point out. And it's not necessarily because like the government is using AI to pick out keywords. We're not that sophisticated. But it all goes to human resources, to HR. So for like the, foresters and marksmen, it goes to this place in a totally different location, and tends to be somebody who doesn't even know what an archaeologist is. So they have a sheet of like, look for these terms or look for these things. And so they just look for that within your resume. And if they don't see those, they're gonna kick it out. And it's really actually problematic because the archaeologists that are waiting for this list of who applied, it's half of the people who actually applied and will even know, like, I know that this person, I had them last season, they applied, why aren't they on the list? And we'll go ask, and it'll be like, well, they're supposed to have a field school and they don't have a field school, and so we actually call them, go, class S-26 is actually a field school. So maybe go in there and go, put a star and go, this is a field school.
Yeah, be explicit.
Yeah, like plain words to somebody who's not an archaeologist. If you have to you gotta put your for a federal job, you have to put your transcript in there. So translating some of that, even like on a cover page, a cover letter is not required for a federal job, but it's not a bad thing. It shows that you can write, it shows that you can target things that people are looking for, even if it's just targeting HR so that you get on the list. And then, because the cogs of government can be slow, don't expect a call the week after you apply. It might be 6 months. It might be a year. Just because of how long it takes to go through certain steps. There's so many jobs, not just archaeology, that we're hiring. We're hiring every position in the federal service. And there aren't enough HR people to process all the work. And all the jobs, so keep applying. Don't wait for something, because they'll often be like, well, we couldn't turn the paperwork around to even hire the position. So the position's still unhired after a year. We're gonna advertise it again. So if you want a federal job, I would say just keep applying, and to get your foot in the door, take that first job. And then you can work your way to where you wanna be or what kind of position you wanna be in. It's, people spend a long time as a seasonal or other types of non-permanent positions, before they get a permanent job. I think it took me, 7 years to get a permanent job. These days, it's a lot quicker, as I said, that there's not, we're hiring so quickly and so many positions, so hope for you guys, won't be that, but getting that foot in the door is really helpful. I would also say, if you're interested in a federal job, go to local agency's office. Or call up a park or a forest or a BLM office and go, hey, can I talk to your archaeologist? And say, I'm interested. And if you can go and volunteer for them, go and talk to them, even just talking on the phone is gonna help. But they can tell you, like, oh yeah, we're hiring, we're looking for people. Oh, we got some money for an internship. Or we're gonna have, some kind of project, this volunteer project, you can, that can help you get that experience. Of what does an artifact look like, and do I really wanna do this work? So calling and talking to somebody, I think for all of us, that's a big part, that we can help you navigate through things. We don't get all that many calls, actually, or people walking in, and that is a great way to get, in the door. If you want that kind of fieldwork experience, and can't afford like a field school or something, for the Forest Service runs what's called Passport in Time, and I think it's passportintime.com. If you Google it again, Passport in Time, it's called PIT projects all across the nation. They're free to go to. Sometimes they're camping, sometimes they're not, but could be excavation, surveys, lab work. It's whatever that local, Forest Service station decided, I need this, and I can take volunteers to do it. It's a good way, and that also gets you that exposure and, face to face with, a federal archaeologist. So, but also if you have some time and you can do some volunteer, or you can ask, maybe any way you can get a stipends or at least place to stay. The local archaeologist on that, federal unit might be like, yeah, you can go out with our field crew. Can't pay you right now, but I will definitely, you can put it on your resume and I'll put you down, you put me down as, your reference for that amount of work. And it's a lot cheaper than going to field school. And you can see whether you like that location, you like those kind of people. Yeah, like everywhere, it's not the agency, it's the people that you work with and the location that you're at. So don't be afraid of any of the federal agencies. Some people, once you get into them, people are like, oh, the Park Service, and, oh, the Forest Service is great. Oh, no, the BLM is great. But you get in an office that you just don't get along with people, it's like, yep, but it's not the agency, it's the location. But, as a federal, with all of us, there's always opportunities coming up all over the place. And that is one of the great things about the federal service, is that we cover all 50 states and all the 8 territories. So you can move around, you can change locations, and you can move up and try new things, and you're not necessarily stuck in one location. You do have to keep applying, but you can move around.
I would really suggest looking for opportunities, like look for besides your field schools or lab classes, look for internships. I think you'll be surprised how many of them are paid. We haven't had any since COVID, but PG&E had paid internships and they're paid better than when I started in CRM, honestly. But there's a lot of volunteer. Get out there and start volunteering, and you might be surprised that you get a job. That's actually how I got my work. I was volunteering, and then they're like, "Oh, you want to come work in the lab doing work day?" So, find those opportunities to start building your resume. Get a variety of experience to kind of show, like I said, that you can think through things, you've had exposure to different things. And then tailor your resume too, once you start getting that experience for the job you're applying for, to show that you know, going back to not only having those keywords, but like, you know, when I applied for PG&E, I made sure to highlight the fact that I worked on a lot of linear projects, you know, whether it was roads or, you know, pipelines or whatever kind of linear things they were, because I knew that that's what the utility did. I think also getting experience interviewing. First time I applied at PG&E, I did not get hired. I walked in and froze up in front of a panel of 6 people, and I knew half of them from grad school. But I wasn't prepared for like the formal panel interview. And I totally dropped the ball on that one. But I went back, I applied, and here I am. So I think also getting some experience with that, so you become comfortable with that setting and being able to have this panel of people in front of you asking you these questions, because they will have, but we score, like, because it has to be an equitable process. So we're going to be asking people the same questions. We're going to be scoring those questions, right? So it will come off, which is very formal.
I'll plug Cal Careers again. I don't know if I said it clearly enough, but that's the California version of USA Jobs. And we do hire people that live in cities.
I would also call out that there's a lot, besides the big ones, there's a lot of other utilities, and
Yes.
City of San Francisco hires archaeologists.
yeah.
There's a lot of local, small city and county agencies that hire CRS.
Oh, yeah, we have a question. Real quick though, I just looked on my phone. There's more than 100 jobs that mentioned archaeology on USA Jobs. I didn't go to Cal Careers. There's 3 specifically with Caltrans, like right now.
We spell it the
Right
Greek
now.
way, I guess.
I was
So-
looking, but trying not to be rude. So there's jobs like right now out there.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
please.
was gonna say that you might have to look under environmental,
Mhm.
or actually sometimes on both.
Mm.
As a veteran, as a grad student, and someone who works as a tech right now for 3 different firms. I'm always looking, and one thing I have found, especially right now while we're sitting here, I was like, let me look at our Cal jobs. Is, it's like Eureka and San Diego, which I have family in both locations, so I'm very familiar. Federal jobs as far as Forest Service, I think one was like Orange, California. They can be a little bit remote. Sometimes I wonder with some of the federal jobs, is it worth it to go like BLM, Wyoming? It's, I had to ask my husband, has he ever considered being a cowboy? Because it was like, pretty well. But do you think just to get our foot in the door as grad students, sometimes it's worth it, especially in those federal jobs, to maybe go to another state for a little while and transfer laterally?
Yeah, I think it's worth it, but you do have to be willing to live in the middle of nowhere. And ask to, so you're aware of what you're walking into. Yeah, I just spent 7 years in Susanville on the Lassen National Forest. We had a district art position where the crew stayed was out, not even in town, and there wasn't even good internet.
I just did the Dixie fire burn, so.
Right, so you know, so Eagle Lake is in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. But definitely had a huge problem trying to keep people there. So there's other places like the BLM in Eureka, Nevada. Like, it's the middle of nowhere, but that's where people get their first permanent, and then they move 2 years later. And it is like the feeder position for people. So you'll see that. I think it's good to move around. I started out in a tiny town in Pennsylvania. I'd never been in Pennsylvania before. I drove 4,000 miles for the job. I spent 2 years there. It was great. But But if you have certain things that you need, please pay attention to it, go visit the location. You can pull out and not go even after you have, accepted the position. But if you can handle that for a little while, it can be worth it. Having a really long, good career, but, with the feds, we have good retirement. It can be very rewarding because you do get to know a place really well, because once you're a district archaeologist or you've worked in the same location for such a long time, you are the expert in archaeology there. There is nobody in the world that knows that archaeology better than you do. Versus a CRM where you may be the only one who knows that site, but then you're moving every 6 weeks. So.
And you actually reminded me of a very good point. So, yeah, she said search for environmental. We're in the middle of a class shift, which I didn't bring it up with our unions. We not, you know, work under 2 of them, but environmental scientist is the new classification that a lot of districts are using to hire. I believe there should be open positions in Oakland, Stockton, Reading, a couple of places up and down, in addition to what you named. So, you in the environmental scientist, I'm not sure, they've been rapidly hiring and things change pretty quickly, and I'm not in the districts, but do keep an eye out for the environmental scientist. The other one is environmental planner, and it'll have archaeology or architectural history for us.
Yeah, I think there's several cities and counties that also use the environmental planner, and then you'll be an archaeologist underneath that.
Yep.
I guess Laura, then Albert, then background.
So field schools vary in length. Some last a few weeks and some last a few months or even up to a year. Is length a determining factor? Like the more experience, the better, or is it you just have to have a field school?
I'm trying to remember what our weights, so we have specific requirements in the minimum walls for the classification. I believe it's, there's just a requirement that there's a field school involved. I think the standard is 6 weeks, and so that's generally kind of the at least it was when I was doing it. A few months would be something else. And it kind of helps you get excavation experience, and you should pay attention to whether that's part of your academic setting or whether, like, if it's part of your degree, like, that's gonna be different than whether it's part of your professional experience, so.
Yeah, I think that's for us, we will, you know, require having had a field school, but really going back to kind of those keywords, it'll say, you know, 1 to 2, I think for our associate level, which is our entry level, it'll say like 1 to 2 years experience, right? That you've gone out and you've gotten some level of professional experience on top of, so you have those basics to get your job, right? That you know, survey, you know how to use a compass, you know how to read a topo map, but then it's more, I think, about kind of that having gotten some experience for us and a lot of CRM firms or other agencies.
On a federal application, there is no minimum. Which is part of the confusion.
Nice.
And it really comes from the Secretary of Interior standards for professional archaeologists. But I'll just say the HR in the federal service just translates that to everybody should have it. But there is no minimum amount. And there's no good definition as to what a field school is. So it could be an academics thing, or you could even just say, like, I volunteered on a pit project, and if you talk to the person who's running that and go, would you consider this a field school? And if you say yes, then put it on. Because really, what it is that field work, that you have that experience doing that field work. And it's so badly worded everywhere. I just say, focus in on what the skills are. And then the length of time will get you towards what level you can be hired at. And that's the overall length of experience and the diversity of experience that you have. So if you're applying for a federal job, we talk in like GS levels, it's called general services, but And I'll say, also, if you're on USA Jobs and you're searching, GS-0102 is an archaeological technician. The GS-0193 is for professional archaeologist. And your GS level, like the lowest GS level of field crew is probably gonna be a GS 4 or 5. A tech, the tech series, the 102 series. And then the crew chief is gonna be a 7, maybe a 9, most likely a 7, still a tech, but maybe a professional. And then the 9 is like a district art. And that'll usually be the professional series. And then above that, it goes 9, 11, 12 and above. So, if you're just starting out, be looking at those GS 4s and 5s. And the more experience that you can show, like I did a field school, I also volunteered here, I also went out and worked with the archaeologist on this location, or I went and helped my professor do this. The more you can put in that, the higher you'll get towards the criteria for the higher levels.
I think you had a question, Dr. Gonzalez.
Yes, hi, so I'm Albert Gonzalez, I teach at Cal State East Bay, and where the students are mine that are going to say, thank you so much for serving this panel. This is wonderful to hear, and I'm enlightened every time they put on one of these, so thank you. My question is about diversity initiatives, if any, like exist, because I know agency folk that I know are real hesitant to talk about diversity initiatives and recruitment efforts. So I asked this question knowing that you may not be able to say much. And hoping that you will anywhere, maybe say something afterwards. But are there any DEI initiatives, diversity initiatives, especially recruitment initiatives at your agencies, respective agencies and companies that students might want to know about, or that have been particularly effective? Is there anything, if these diversity initiatives exist, is there something that the students here should be thinking about in terms of application, keywords, et cetera? If they exist.
So the federal agencies do have some direct hire initiatives. And I'm only hesitant in that I don't know them very well. So that is something that, one, talking to the local units, but also calling calling HR for the federal services, so you Google that too. Albuquerque has all of human resources for the whole Forest Service. And the Park Service has a similar one, I think in Albuquerque too. And they know those initiatives the best. But some of those are just hiring events at certain things. So the one that I probably know the most is the Forest Service often goes to the Society for Forestry annual meetings and have a table, and they can directly hire right at that table. And sometimes, and they just started doing archaeology at that, so it's really weird, like, why would you hire an archaeologist at a forestry meeting? And they do the same thing at range management meetings. It's because that's where we're used to hiring people, and they just throw in other jobs. That, or they can help you go through things. So one is just keeping an eye out for those things, calling up the agencies and asking for those. There is a lot of those for students and for graduate students. Usually those direct hires for students can last up to 2 years after you've graduated. So again, like, ask them if they have any of those, if you're interested, just directly. And the local archaeologist may not know just because they don't have experience with it, and because we're just way too busy to keep up on all of those. But like, hey, can I talk to the district ranger? And the Forest Service is a district ranger, and BLM, there's a field office manager. And there's usually the HR or the park superintendent for the National Park Service. You go and ask them and they can direct you better than the archaeologist.
Yeah, for Caltrans, I would say we have a ton of diversity initiatives. We're hiring new entire offices to ensure that highway projects and development are more equitable and sustainable, and we have equity and diversity training that we all go through in several different formats, and then they translate into goals and strategic directions that we all follow. I'm not quite sure how that's translating to direct hiring, like directives. When you go to Caltrans and you put in an application and you get selected for an interview, you will have there will be an HR representative that contacts you, and they're the right people to talk to in terms of that, because essentially there would be at some point scoring that they would be able to apply, but I'm not sure how that, truthfully, I'm not sure how that's translated to directives for the hiring manager, the one doing the interview and screening. I can say it's part of our goals. Having more diverse workforce is very important to us, and lack of diversity is, the history of the lack of diversity has led to difficult relationships with many descendant communities that don't see archaeology as really serving their needs. So we're quite cognizant of that. We want it to change, and so they're affecting our practice, but I'm not quite sure how they've translated into direct hiring.
Yeah, I would say the same. We're keenly aware. Matter of fact, the CRS meet quarterly at PG&E. We all get together, and we just spent 2 hours at our last meeting kind of discussing basically the colonial structure we're in, and how do we get diverse, how do we work with communities, what is tribal monitoring, what is equity, like a lot of these conversations. But going back to what I said, and that we don't see your resumes, right? And I think that's the hard thing. To my knowledge, there's no direct initiatives. There's broader initiatives at the company around DIB. We add belonging at the end of it because we like acronyms. There's requirements like on tribal lands for hiring so many native workers and whatnot, right? There's a lot of things like that. But when we're talking about coming in and directly getting a job with PG&E, there's, like I said, there's that that HR wall. So I think it's about how do we get the students those skills for being successful in the hiring process. How do you get those skills to successfully interview, to successfully apply? And how do we get the students in the first place, right? How do you get, we as anthropology and archaeology, how do you get that diversity in that application pool to begin with, which has been, like I said, traditionally people that look like me, right? And we need that diversity in our field, because that is all those voices is what gives importance and changes and brings all those perspectives and makes us a really rich and successful field in identifying and protecting cultural resources.
Sounds to me like we have to get a resume writing and cover letter workshop with the HR Albuquerque needs to help us. We'll choose the students and they tell us how to pass the first hurdle.
Yeah. I think tangential to that, you ask if there's stuff that your students could do. I think it's part of one of the biggest barriers that we're seeing is just getting the word out that we're looking for that involvement, and we have limited time and resources to be able to do that. So a lot of the shortcoming is probably on our side in doing student outreach, getting into different communities and advertising that there is an accessible, respectful kind of archaeology that you can be taking part in an agency. And I don't think that messaging has gotten out there very well. We're starting to address that. Like I said, we have these strategic directions and goals and initiatives that we all have internally. One of the ones that I'm, very interested in is getting out and doing more kind of BIPOC and other community and other descendant community outreach in more accessible locations to kind of address the structural barriers to folks, not everyone can get into Berkeley and get direct access, so I think a lot of it's on our side too. But yes, from your side, that the resume and kind of practical job application training would be quite helpful on that hire.
You still have a question up front? Okay, thanks.
More specifically for the federal agencies, I'm wondering how you balance like working under a federal agency, but working in different states and like counties and even like local communities, which will all have their own stakes. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, is there a priority of what you follow first, or? And along those lines, I'm also wondering like how it works working with, like, do you work with just federally recognized tribes or, any tribal nation?
Good question. So it's federal land, managers are, we are managing federal lands. So we follow federal law. Sort of regardless of what the state and counties have in place, because it's always trumped by the federal law. So often people and tribal members go like, okay, you're following Sequoia. And I go, nope, I've never read it, don't need to, it doesn't apply here. NEPA and NHPA, so National Environmental Policy Act and National Historic Preservation Act, we do follow. Now there are some things that still get pulled in that might be state and county, so like the National Historic Preservation Act set up SHPOs. So the State Historic Preservation Officer, they are state appointed position, and in California, they're under state parks, and it's all state. Well, they get a stipend for federal money, but they are a state agency that we send our stuff to, our compliance, and we ask for their concurrence. But even in that, a lot of people are against it, like, well, we do what SHPO says. No, we actually don't. We ask for their concurrence and we hope they concur. If ultimately we get into a disagreement, we can pull out and say, we're going to your boss in Washington, DC. Or even if we don't agree there, we can pull out, but that's like barely ever happens. I think only the Department of Defense likes to pull that one. So, but within both NEPA and NHPA, and the Section 106 process, there is interest, especially in NHPA, there's interested parties. And that's all the local groups, the county, historic societies, and the tribes. And in NEPA, there's all this public outreach. That's the whole point of it, is let the public know what you're doing and let them influence the decision. So, and that's usually not necessarily the archaeologists going out and talking to those groups. You do get more on the tribal side. We are federally required to talk to the federally recognized tribes. And then there's all this other background policy and a little bit of, not as much law, because the law is saying you have to talk to federally recognized tribes. But so there's a lot of policy out there that goes, all those other tribal people that the government failed to recognize. I think that we fail in that, we suck at that, we're terrible at that. We're still supposed to talk to them as interested parties. And so we do. And in some places you have a lot more non-federally recognized tribal members and tribes that want to talk to you and are coming and talking to you than the federally recognized tribes. So depending on the law, so like for the 106 process, we have much greater latitude and we're supposed to be talking to everybody. And when it comes to NAGPRA, like human remains, we are there is no ifs, ands, or buts. It is, you must and can only give to federally recognized tribes. So I think the new version is changing that a bit. So there's a new version in there right now, but you can backdoor that by telling the non-federally recognized tribes, if you have an agreement with that federally recognized tribes, and you hand that, and I hand the human remains over to the federally recognized tribes representative, and they immediately hand it to you, that's none of my business. And I think that's appropriate, but you guys have to work that out. I can't influence that at all. I can't state that in any of my paperwork or anything else like that. But that's how that law is written. So there are ways to, we all work around stuff. What's your question specifically about that?
Not necessarily specifically about that, but about federal jobs.
Yeah.
I was looking at some internship opportunities through the NPS, through the NECE program. And it mentioned that a completion of one of their internships would go towards earning a public land for non-competitive hiring certificate. And I'm having a hard time really finding much information about the benefits of that. I don't know if you could speak to what that is or how that might help or if it worth it.
Sounds like after you complete your internship, you have hiring preference for a job, and it might be that direct hire. So first I'm gonna answer your question.
Yeah.
And then for that, so in the federal services, there are certain positions, it sounds like that one that you just read, is once you complete that, they can give you a direct, they can go just on hire you. But sometimes the caveat is that on that hire is that they can hire you anywhere in the United States, anywhere within that agency that fits that, your background and your position, and you must take it. If you decline it, or you get up to like 3 times, if you decline it, then you're out of luck.
That's been a bit of my concern about working with NPS is just hireability being kind of up to them.
Yeah, so there's usually on every job announcement at the bottom, there's a contact info. I would contact that person and get a lot more specifics about it. But I'll just say part of, you know, for me, the moving around, and I've worked in 5 different states for federal agencies, has been great because they've helped me move, helped pay for the move, I've moved up, I've met new people, I've seen new places. I've experienced a lot of things that I wouldn't if I had just stayed in one location, so there are some great advantages to that. But in other times, it's not a good thing, so just ask a lot of questions and get a lot of information from a lot of different people and try to seek out people who have done that program before and ask them the pitfalls of it. Because part of that turnover in archaeology, that turnover in every position is that everybody is learning their new job and their new things, so whoever you talk to might have only done it once, they don't know all the nuances and all the differences in it, so asking a lot of questions of a lot of people can help you get better answers these days.
Really quick, we are gonna have a reception after this, but maybe one more question. I think your hand was up, and then, all right, you're disappointed. Yes, 2 more then. 2 more questions, but then we'll be in the atrium and you can ask folks directly, you can talk to each other. All right, please.
So I'm trans, so one of the concerns that I have going into archaeology and specifically trying to get a job with like the National Forest Service and National Park Service is that I am a criminal in several states now because in 21 states, there are anti-trans laws, so like, if I was a part of a program and then they were like, okay, there's a position in like Tennessee, we want you to take it, I'm like, you know, are there considerations made for the fact that I guess it's like federal land, but the climate is hostile and state laws are hostile, actively punitive. So with the National Park Service, like, and you may not really answer this, which is totally fine, like I would expect you to, but are there considerations made for that? In that case, like, would it be like, oh, okay, like, we understand you cannot take this job for this reason?
I'd say that there are no, there aren't any considerations. If you have applied, the consideration is you determining if you want to take a job there, and so you want to apply there. So like every job has locations, and like I said, they might be for 250 different locations, and you pick the locations that you're willing to go to if you're offered. That is the communities in which you live in as a federal employee can be the most problematic thing about being a federal employee. Regardless of what it is, it can just be that you wear the uniform. There's a reason that BLM has polo shirts as their uniform, because people used to shoot at them. And they have been shot at, and even not that long ago. Because they are the federal government in a rural community that doesn't like the federal government. You know, coming from most small towns in California are very conservative. And the rural counties in California are very conservative compared to Berkeley. And so that can be really hard to live in. And Forest Service and BLM and Park Service are living in those communities. Your coworkers can be your community within that bigger bubble of that. So I would say within each agency, we try to be very inclusive. The people you work with are great, but they can be, there's no ifs and ands or buts about it. It can be hugely difficult to live in those small communities if that's not, you don't fit. And that not fitting may just be the agency you work for. Plus add in all the rest of your life and what you want to do. And and that is part of the reason we have a hard time hiring these days. So.
Sorry, y'all, felt like I brought the atmosphere down.
No,
That's a hard question.
but I think it's a great one. I think I alluded to it, and then we have a hard time that if you're gonna come to a federal agency, you expect to be in a small town that's far away, may not have good internet. It can be just a hard adjustment when you've lived in a city, and a different community than moving into these different places. So, yeah, I'll just say, I grew up in the Bay Area. I did my undergraduate here, my graduate work is from San Francisco State. So I came, go Gators. And then I've lived in Susanville, California, that just sued, the governor and has 3 prisons, and I've lived in every red county in California, plus all these blue counties. So regardless of how I personally feel about any of it, I don't necessarily mesh with where the different places that I've lived. They can be greatly enriching, but they can be greatly frustrating.
I can say for Caltrans, we don't mess around with that kind of stuff. We are a fully inclusive environment. If anybody gives you any trouble around that kind of thing, we have a zero tolerance policy around it. We have reasonable accommodations to deal with it. We have telework policies that allow you to kind of work around some of the issues that might come along with problematic staff that while you're dealing with them. A lot of our districts do kind of require a day or two in the office right now, so we have districts all up and down California though, so it's not just Reading, you know, we've got an Oakland office, and San Diego all over the place, and so we're a fully inclusive environment. We have staff on the panel, on the BIPOC LGBTQ plus panel on the SCAs. If you ever want to go talk to them, we have a kind of a group that talks about those matters in the field of archaeology, and we've got staff on that panel too, so.
Same here. Matter of fact, and we extend it to, I mentioned that we have an army of consultants. If you are a sub and a contractor working for PG&E and you experience that on one of our projects, there's a zero tolerance policy with it as well.
Yeah, I work for, I have a on-call, just got it actually,
Nice.
on-call gig with Pacific Legacy.
Hey, here in Berkeley?
Yeah, yeah, they mentioned, like explicitly in the interview that like it was zero tolerance policy. And they like outlined like all of their stuff. I was like, I really wasn't that worried about it, but thank you.
Yeah.
If you guys like clear that they like explicitly say that and stuff, like, you know.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah, it's good. They also hire you as an employee, part-time employee, not a contractor. So you get like benefits.
Okay, one more folks, and then we'll have a reception.
Okay, so you mentioned that, you hit a plateau where you had to go to grad school. And so I was kind of thinking about that. A lot of us are undergrads. Do you think that the workforce right now is, friendly towards just going into the bachelor's? And where do you think that plateau is, where if you were entering the workforce, you would need to go back to school?
I think it depends on where you go. You know, for Caltrans, it's gonna be harder to elevate past a certain point without a master's degree because we have internal requirements. We comply with 106 through a programmatic agreement. That's an agreement with our SHPO, with the ACHP, with Army Corps, and with FHWA. And as a result of that, we have very stringent requirements based on the SOIS, but actually a little bit more rigorous for you to do archaeology at Caltrans, because we have a lot of responsibility. We make a lot of decisions for FHWA and for, and I realize we've got a time issue here, but we make a lot of decisions. I would assume, but we do, I mean, we hire folks that are working on their masters or that don't have their masters yet. We just have to, we have to actively figure out ways to get you the experience required once you're done with that, because you often don't have a lot of the field or other critical experience to get past the masters.
Dr. White, could you break that down for maybe some of the people who haven't worked in CRM and they might not know section 106?
I need an acronym bell that people bring up me whenever I use it.
So the Secretary of the Interior standards are kind of guidelines that are set up that outline the qualifications for a professional archaeologist. So it's not the qualifications for everyone who does archaeology, but the specific ones that a professional archaeologist does. And so I can talk more about it, but there is a requirement of a graduate school, a certain amount of supervisory experience, and then a demonstration that you can complete research from conception to completion, which a lot of times is a master's thesis.
Yes, I was just gonna add, really quick onto it, would you just say recommendation, is it better for people that are graduating soon with that bachelor's to go on, get experience and try and get jobs? Or should we be just going straight to grad school?
Get experience.
Yeah, as someone who teaches grad students, go do the job.
Yeah.
Go do it.
Yeah.
See if you
Yeah,
really
see if you
wanna
wanna
be
do
here for years, go do it.
Yeah, and I found out I was actually really burned out when I went to grad school, having gone straight through. I feel like I should have actually taken some time.
And then we find folks who have the qualifications but don't have the kind of experience to really be able to oversee. A lot of the experience you get in the private side or doing that field work is how to deal with difficult situations and difficult people that you end up encountering in those situations. So if you were to come to Caltrans straight out of your master's degree, you might you know, kind of have a bit more of a hard time than if you had gotten experience in the field, gotten experience in the private side or in other agencies, working on the more kind of archaeology side.
Yeah.
As opposed to the.
Well, in the federal services, a master's degree is not required at any level. Though we prefer that you have a master's if you're going to be in the upper levels, a GS 11 or above, but it is not required. The applications, the job announcements will always say, that something that's equivalent, it's your job experience equivalent to what a master's would be. So as long as you've been a GS 7 for a year, you can apply for a GS 9 job. If you've been a 9 for a year, you can apply for an 11. That's the way it goes. The Secretary of Interior standards don't matter at all within that system of hiring. So if you're up in that level and you have a master's, you're gonna compete better for those jobs. Because the Secretary of Interior standards are only for principal investigators. For somebody who's overseeing the work, not for the people doing the work. So you only need one principal investigator, one Secretary of Interior standards qualified person for the whole project.
Yeah.
So that's for the federal government, that's pretty important. And I did 10 years before I went back for my master's. It was just like, yeah, I wanna learn something new and do something different and move up.
All right, well, let's take this conversation to the other room. Thank you very much, everyone, for